Fairly early on in my career, I understood the value and importance of business records. This was no doubt due to the fact that I worked with the Scottish Business Archives at the University of Glasgow, where Leslie Richmond was then head. Leslie had an extraordinary career. When the Glasgow shipyards were being demolished around her, she was appraising and ultimately saving the records from destruction. She summed up the importance of business records as follows. Business is a pattern of complex operations which has affected the lives of people since humans began exchanging goods and services. Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, business has had major impacts on all people in this country. It has transformed population mobility, family life, life expectancy, communities and work patterns, as well as what we eat, wear, and do socially. Downsizing, flexible workforces, and outsourcing continue to affect the social environment and lives of business employees, managers, and customers. The stories of communities built and destroyed by the ever-changing life of business deserve to be preserved. The ingenuity of people to design and manufacture the wonders of their age, as well as the most humble of everyday objects, warrants selection in the national and local archives in this country. If we want to understand Britain and the rest of the world today and over the last 3 centuries, we should be keeping business records. Our commercial and industrial heritage is as important as our cultural and natural heritage. 2 years ago, we finally got our hands on the Young's Brewery plc archive. After a couple of months' delay thanks to the COVID lockdown, we have now finished cataloguing and repackaging this collection. The cataloguing and repackaging of the collection has been generously funded by the William Allen Young Charitable Trust. I'm not going to attempt to give you a definitive history of the company, but I aim to give you some background on the company's origins and share some of the collection's many highlights with you. The Ram Brewery site on Wandsworth High Street was home to Young's & Co. for over 170 years. The origins of Young's and the Ram Brewery can be traced back to the 16th century, when an establishment called the Ram Inn was situated. A brewery was later built on the site and was initially known as the Wandsworth Brewery. It would change hands many times until, in 1831, the owner of the business at that time, George Tritton, sold the brewery and more than 80 pubs to Charles Young and his partner Anthony Bainbridge. It's really at this point that Young's as we know it begins, and this year will be the business's 190th anniversary. From 1883, the Young family had sole control of the business, which became an incorporated company in 1890. The business continued to trade in the Wandsworth area until 2006, when the decision was taken to move its brewing operation to Bedford in a new joint venture with fellow brewer Charles Wells. The Young's archive is a diverse collection and includes photographs, financial records, maps and plans, correspondence, and legal records. Additionally, we are eagerly anticipating the arrival of the brewing books, which are currently still with the company. We expect these will be the most popular series in the collection and have already had a number of inquiries about them, not least from the odd person who wants to attempt their own home brew. One of my favourite record series in this collection is the photographs, for a number of reasons. They show the operational side of the business very well, which you can see from the following. These images show cask making, which took place in-house. It's particularly relevant to Young's, as John Young decided that Young's would continue brewing cask ale when most breweries were changing to kegs. Cask making is a craft, and this side of the business is an interesting one too. At one point, the business would have had a blacksmith, so brewing certainly isn't the only craft which would have taken place. and certainly the photographic collection seems to suggest that saddle making also took place. The photographs give the researcher an idea of the scale of the business's premises. I'm particularly keen on this image, which shows the scale of the fermentation tanks. This is quite a familiar type of image in business and industrial archives, where you have the scale of the equipment or premises shown by the seemingly tiny humans featured. The photographs also tell you something about the demographic of the workforce. Photographs of the bottling plant show a mainly female workforce, for example, while photographs of the brewing itself show a largely male workforce. But this series also shows something else, which I think is very important and which is quite hard for us to quite imagine today. One thing which was very noticeable to me when I started working with business collections was that many employees would spend their whole working lives with the same company. I think this is something that we've rather lost now. It's not unusual to change jobs and employers every few years. We have several photographs which document awards for long service, which show that this was just not the case in the last century. And it's certainly not just management that are rewarded or recognised for their long service. The photographs also show us a rather playful side of Young's, which in turn tells us something about the business's place in the community. We can see this from photographs of the Young's nativity, which enabled children to pet real animals in the Young's farmyard. And it's not an exaggeration to say it was a farmyard. John Young was notorious for picking up animals and giving them a home, much to the despair of farmyard staff. Here too is a nice photograph of Santa, otherwise known as John Young. The other thing that I love about the photograph series, however, is the sheer number of unexpected celebrities and VIPs who pop up. For example, we have Phil Collins with one of the Shire horses, and Frankie Howard either dressed as a medieval jester or an elf, I'm not sure which. And we also have photographs of the wonderful Barbara Windsor. A lot of filming took place in and around Young sites, and this is reflected in the collection. In 1969, a scene from the film The Magic Christian was shot outside the Duke's Head pub in Putney. The film is about an eccentric billionaire who adopts a young homeless man and demonstrates to him how wealth can be used to manipulate people. The photographs in our collection show stars Peter Sellers, Ringo Starr and Spike Milligan during filming, with a young stray and horses in the background. In 1976, Hollywood actor Robert Mitchum spent a day filming in southwest London for a film titled Death Came Suddenly, which was eventually released under the title The Amsterdam Kill the following year. The completed film shows a caption with the legend, Wandsworth, London, and a shot of Robert Mitchum entering the Brewery Tap pub. This photograph shows him relaxing at the Brewery Tap after the day's filming was complete. One local newspaper article from the time claimed that Mitchum drank at least 5 pints of Young's Special during his visit. Another film production visited Wandsworth in 1985 when the cast and crew for Honest, Decent and True shot some scenes from the film at the Ram Brewery. Filmed for the BBC's Screen 2 strand and broadcast the following year, the film tells the story of an advertising agency's attempt to create a campaign for a new lager by a long-established brewery. The brewing hole and one of the fermenting tanks can be seen briefly near the start of the film. This photo shows some of the film's cast, including Richard E. Grant and Adrian Edmondson, inspecting a keg inside the brewing hole. But undoubtedly, the most famous and perhaps the most important person featured in the collections is Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth II. There are 5 albums of photographs, correspondence and newspaper cuttings documenting her visit to the Ram Brewery in 1981. It's clear that this meant a great deal to the company, and it's also clear the sheer volume of planning involved by both parties for one visit. It's worth noting that the invitation to visit in 1981 was extended in 1979. We also have newspaper cuttings retained by the company and a number of scrapbooks covering a myriad of topics. When I was first learning to be an archivist and working with the Scottish Business Archives, I was taught to call this sort of record guard books. I think that's because in compiling them, a company is guarding their future reputation, and certainly they're guarding their history. Other visual records in this collection include the marketing records, specifically beer label designs for Young's beers. When Young and Bainbridge began brewing beer at the Ram Brewery in the 1830s, branded products did not exist in the industry, and many brewers produced beers with no marking other than an X, which denoted the strength of a particular beer. It was only when the company's first trademark was registered in 1893 that the company adopted an official emblem, a Dorset horn ram. And as the demand for bottled beers grew in the early 20th century, they began to print labels for their beers with the ram emblem. By 1923, Young's began creating label designs for beers such as strong ale, amber ale, and oatmeal stout, the label for which you can see here. In 1932, a product called Burton was introduced, which was the direct ancestor of the prize-winning Winter Warmer beer, and, like the modern day version, Burton was only brewed in the winter months. Two other popular Young's brands, Special and Ramrod, were introduced in 1949 and 1971, respectively, and here's the label for the latter. Young's also produced special bottlings to mark national events. A coronation ale was bottled in 1953 to celebrate the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. This beer continued to be available under the name Celebration Ale from 1954 until 1971. Special bottlings were also created to mark the Queen's Silver Jubilee in 1977, Silver Sovereign, and to mark the 50th anniversary of VE Day, Victory Ale, which you can see here. In addition to special bottlings to mark national events, Young's also produced special bottlings for long-serving tenants of their pubs and also employees upon their retirement from the business. Special bottlings were even created for events as diverse as the launch of the Heavy Horses album by the rock band Jethro Tull in 1978. When Young's was first established, horses were routinely used by breweries to transport their beer to public houses. Shire horses tended to be favoured for this work, as they were a breed that had the size and strength required to shift several tons of goods. From 1893, these horses were also exhibited at horse shows until the 1920s, when the director of Young's decided to buy horses specifically for showing, rather than using their delivery horses for this purpose. As a result, several medals were won at various London shows in 1925, and Young's would enjoy many more successes at horse shows over the years. By the mid-20th century, the horse haulage business in London collapsed due to the increasing popularity and availability of motorised transport. However, the chairman of Young's at this point, Henry Young, saw the horses as integral to the firm's identity and wanted to continue the tradition of using them for deliveries. It was eventually decided that if deliveries by horse were restricted to 5 miles around the brewery, it would still be financially sound to continue with the practice. This stance persisted when John Young became chairman of the business. By 1964, Young's were still sending out 5 pairs of working horses to make deliveries every day, when almost every other brewery had ceased using workhorses. Such was the appreciation for the Shire horses and their presence in the borough, that when a decision to stop daily deliveries by dray horses was made by management in 1997, it was soon overturned by a public outcry, and deliveries by horse to pubs in and around Wandsworth continued until the brewery closed in 2006. You can really see the importance of horses to Young's in the horse keeping records. This series includes horsekeeper diaries dating from 1934 to 1969. These record details such as which horses were used for deliveries each day, which draymen were on duty or were absent, as well as other issues that may have occurred during the day, such as illness among the horses, adverse weather conditions, and road traffic accidents. Most of the diaries have various bits of ephemera tucked into the volumes, such as correspondence and notes relating to entries in the diaries. These include birthday cards and a letter to Steve the horse on the occasion of his 21st birthday, which you can see here. This series also features records of the horse shows and parades from 1923 to 1970. These detail the horses and draymen that took part in each event and also the prizes won. The Shire horses entered by Youngs enjoyed great success at these shows. It was estimated that more than 2,000 prizes had been won by the horses between 1924 and 1967. The series also contains registers of horses bought by the brewery. Dating from 1910 to 1950, they provide details of horses at the stables, where the animal was purchased from, and whether it was later sold on or gifted. For me, these records show the exemplary standard of care the horses were given and the esteem in which the staff who looked after them were held by the firm. This series also shows how staff activity is documented throughout the collection, but perhaps my favourite item which documents staff is a slim black volume dubbed the Black Book. This dates from 1870 and seems to have been created by the head brewer Herbert Lee. It records the names, date of joining, age at joining, marital status, previous employer, and any misdemeanours committed by the workforce. These included stealing beer and poor timekeeping. Here is a record of Henry Osborne, who joined the business in January 1870 as a drayman. He was 31 years old at the time and was married with 6 children. His first offence was committed in February 1880, where he was fined 5 shillings after being suspected of stealing beer. His second offence was in June 1881, where he was fined 20 shillings for taking out a riding pulley. He was then fined 2 shillings and 6 pence in August 1882 for incivility to customers. It was not until April 1884, after committing his 6th offence for trotting horses, that he faced the threat of dismissal from the company. The end of his entry states that he died in 1902 in the London hospital. The book shows that the other men who also managed 6 offences before being threatened with dismissal, although some were discharged after just 2 or 3 offences if they were serious enough. Other common offences included smoking in the brewery and playing cards in the firm's time. The book also provides evidence of how seriously management took cruelty towards horses in the charge of employees, as there are numerous examples of men being reprimanded or dismissed for poor treatment of the horses. Attitudes towards men caught drinking or in a drunken state were somewhat more relaxed, as drunkenness was seen as an occupational hazard, and the brewery tended to be more lenient, at least towards first offenders. You can see this in this unposed photograph of men who appear to be sleeping off an afternoon pint. However, this leniency did not extend to those who took stolen beer outside the premises, as this offence was almost always punished by dismissal. The practice of filling entries in the Black Book was continued by successive head brewers up until the early 1950s. The book gives a revealing insight into the indiscretions of workers at the brewery during the period it covers, and how those men were dealt with by senior management. To me, this book also shows senior management taking interest and care in the welfare of staff. Henry was discharged in 1882, but his death is still recorded in 1902. Sure, this might have been for administration purposes. Henry might have had a pension, for example. But it's interesting to me that it's not just his death which is recorded, but its cause and its place. Other records which feature in the Young's collection are perhaps less entertaining, but they are what I would call the bones of any collection. These include administrative records such as minutes, as well as memorandums and articles of association. Minutes are a key resource in understanding the governing of a business or businesses if we are to consider the many subsidiaries Young's took on. Similarly, we have memorandum and articles of association for a number of businesses taken over by Young's. These are important as they state the main aims and objectives of a business, as well as its rules of operation. The memorandum and articles of association from Young's subsidiary branches show how they branched out to catering, cleaning, and wine merchants. Similarly, I finished off cataloguing the financial records. Again, these aren't something that it's easy to sell to an audience, but they tell us about the business's financial health at any given time. What were they investing in? How much it cost to maintain factories, pubs, and other sites? All important information to an historian of business, and all of which add context to what are generally considered the more exciting records in the collection. The last year has been tough for many businesses, especially businesses in the hospitality sector. This last photograph was taken in the 1990s at an annual general meeting. And the sentiment on the banner behind, which reads, "Young's marches on," seems an appropriate one on which to end.